having a hard time because I'm remembering this moment. And it's hard. It's hard to go back in time and kind of relive something, but I feel like sharing this is going to be really helpful. So I'll never forget the moment that I walked into my 3-year-old's room that had poop smeared all over it. Anywhere she could touch, there was poop. Toys, books, clothes, closet, walls, floor, everything. And it's truly amazing how far poop can go. You really want to get down to it. But that's not the thing that upsets me. It's how I responded. I can just, this is the feeling, and I like hate saying it, but I yelled. I just yelled at her, and I'm like, what are you doing? What's wrong with you? What were you thinking? Why would you do this? Like all of those things started just coming out of me. And the most embarrassing part is I was like over halfway done with parenting coaching school, so I knew better. I knew how I could and should be responding in that moment. But I was going through some stuff that day, and I just defaulted. And this moment was the point for me that I was like, I need to start understanding shame. I need to start understanding how shame plays a role in my parenting. And I wanted to ensure that I was not going to shame my child intentionally ever again. And let's back up. I don't think intentionally I was thinking, I want to shame her. I just was in such shock and disbelief that I lost it. And that was a really hard moment. And watching her reaction after, the kind of slumped over, she just kind of really went inward, and she just started crying, and her face just like, she just was so sad, and her head was buried down. I knew she was feeling like she was a bad kid. Like she had done the worst thing in the entire world. And when I walked in, she probably would have felt bad about what had happened, but I don't think she would have thought I am such a bad kid had I not said those things. So that's where this video really comes from, is me just trying to share some phrases that I believe are shaming and that we as parents should stop saying. But the most important part of this video is not these phrases, which you're probably clicked on this video because you're very interested, like, do I say these things? But I'm going to give you things that you can be doing instead so that you don't shame your kids and you can really handle this in a way that is going to teach them and help them to grow versus shaming them and holding them basically to what happened and keeping them stuck in that behavior. So for those of you who don't know me, my name is Alexis, and I am a parenting coach and a mama to 2 little girls. And it is my mission to help parents to become the parent, not only that they want to be, that they were actually made to be. And I love being able to help parents to rekindle this relationship with their child and to give them the tools to help raise a child with a foundation of love and connection and empathy, really, and to give their child a safe place to grow up in. I think it's so important that we as parents get to know our triggers and what's going on for us as well, because then we are able to show up as the parent that we know we can be and that we're really, really proud of. So I hope that this video today gives you some tools that you can start using so that way after a situation happens, you're feeling proud of how you handled things and you feel like you are giving your child a lesson to move forward in, so that way when a situation comes up like this again, they can have the tools to handle it in a way that isn't going to resolve and poop all over the wall. Doesn't mean it's not going to happen, but you've at least given them the tools and they have the ability to access them. So with that being said, I want to share just a little bit about shame. And if you are new to shame and this idea of shame, I highly recommend checking out all of Brene Brown's work. I have been studying her work for about 8 years. I absolutely I love it. Before I became a parenting coach, I was integrating this into my everyday life. My favorite book by her is The Gift of Imperfections, which is going to surprise you because Daring Greatly is, I think, like her most popular book. But The Gift of Imperfections, I feel like, is great for parents, and it's still one of just my go-to favorite books. I read it fairly often, I'd say once a year at least. So anyway, I want to give you a couple of quotes from her that are going to help us to understand what shame is at its core, because if we can understand what shame is, we can start identifying it in our parenting. And I think that, like, hearing the phrases today that are shameful are going to give you an idea of things that could be shaming your child, but understanding exactly what shame is going to help you to actually apply it to your child and what you're saying, because you're going to understand what makes up shame, if that makes any sense. Okay, so let me give you these two quotes. So quote number 1. So guilt is the feeling of I did a bad thing, and shame is the belief that I am bad. So let's let that sink in for a second. So guilt is I did a bad thing. Shame is I am bad. And so her next quote is going to kind of help tie these together. So guilt is just as powerful, but its influence is positive, while shame is destructive. Shame erodes our courage and fuels disengagement. So just go with me for a second to a moment when you were a child and you remember feeling just this deep disconnection from your parent. And I'm sure that the more you go back into this moment, the events leading up to this moment, you may start to see glimpses of shame. And when you see those glimpses of shame, I want you to think about all you wanted in that moment was for a reconnection with your parent. And so when we look into our child's life and our child's experience, how do we want to show up as a parent for them that's really empowering, that's about teaching, it's about having empathy and prioritizing really the connective piece? Because imagine had your parent tried to connect with you before just shaming you. Imagine how differently you probably would have learned the lesson. You probably wouldn't have done it again. And for me, that understanding totally shifted the way I wanted to handle situations like this when they came up in the future. So, with all of that being said, I do plan on doing a whole video on guilt and shame in the future. So if you're watching this a few months after I've posted it, it may already be recorded, and I will put it in the description below. So let's get into the 4 shame phrases that you may be saying. And if you are saying them, I pray that you don't guilt yourself or shame yourself for saying these things. Rather, look at the what to do instead and start trying to implement them. So maybe grab a notebook, jot these things down so that way you have these tools for the next time something kind of big happens in your parenting. All right, so let's go with phrase number 1. I'm going to keep looking back at my notes here just so I don't miss anything. So phrase number 1. Well, I told you so. Yeah, I've totally said that more times than I'd like to say. It's this feeling as a parent that, like, I know better. You don't know what you're doing. And the truth is, our child doesn't know what they're doing, especially if they're in the toddler years. I mean, they've had very little, experience. And I like to add this thought in here that we as parents have had a lot more life experiences than our child has. So to expect them to be mini adults is kind of hard in this situation. Like, how do they know how to handle a situation? They don't. They have never been in this situation. And if they have, maybe it wasn't modeled well. So if it wasn't modeled well, they don't know what they're doing. They are just literally, I guess, behaving out of instinct because that's all they know how to do. So I think it's really important to know where a child is coming from in this instance. But I want to now give you a tool, so of what you can do instead of just saying, well, I told you so. So I would like to start with sportscasting the situation. If you don't know what sportscasting is, I do plan on doing a video again in the future, so make sure you check the description box below if it's, been a few months. So sportscasting is really just explaining what you saw. It's telling them, this is what I saw happening, and it gives them the ability to kind of slow down and see it. This should not be something that is shaming. For instance, you wouldn't want to say, I saw that you roughly went over and punched the dog in the face. That is like coming at them with claws, right? We want to come at them kind of more like this, like, hey, I noticed you spilled the milk all over. It's okay, accidents happen. I noticed that your milk was close to the edge. Maybe next time we just kind of push it in. Or push it closer to the center of the table or whatever. And they may not have realized that milk was that close to the edge. If I give an example that goes with the dog situation, it would be something like, hey, I noticed that you went over and you hit the dog. Would you like to explain to me what happened? Kind of giving them that opportunity. Now I know what you're thinking. Okay, if I have a toddler's not going to respond. I understand that. A lot of toddlers don't have the words yet. But even with my 18-month-old, I'm giving her the option to say something. I want her to feel heard and to feel seen in that moment. So I'm not projecting my thoughts, my judgments, and my opinions on that moment. Rather, just stating what happened. Okay, phrase number 2. And this one is the one that I used, so you knew this was coming. How dare you? How dare you do something like this? Oh, yeah. It's not a phrase that is going to make our child feel like we are understanding or we're curious about what happened. It's just saying, like, you're bad. You shouldn't have done this. What were you thinking? Like, that's the thought process that's going through their mind. So instead of saying something like, how dare you, I invite you to get curious, right? Get curious, then sportscast. So you're going to get curious in your own mind. Maybe don't even ask questions. Why did this happen? Sportscast. And I'm going to give you an example. So, hey, what happened here? I see that there's poop all over. So, getting curious. Hey, what happened? You can even pause. Let them talk about what's going on. My 3-year-old will tell me what she thinks happened. And then I will say, I see that there's poop all over. Just very, very blunt, not a lot of words, not a lot of fluff, just that's it. And it's letting them know, like, this is what I'm seeing, but it's giving them the opportunity to also explain themselves. So this for me is really helpful. It helps me as the parent to come down from feeling angry and mad, and it helps me to kind of back up and say, hey, this wasn't done to hurt me or to make me mad. There was another reason why this was done. I don't know why, but it was done. Phrase number 3. I am so disappointed in you. We've all said that. Or we've heard that. For me, I definitely heard that. And it's a phrase that is really hard to hear because you just know you're bad. Like that's just a phrase. It's like, I know that I'm bad in the inside. And so when I actually read Brene Brown's quote, I was like, that I am so disappointed in you. Just that deep rooted, it's guilt is like, some people would say I feel guilt. No, I just feel shame. I just feel like I am so bad. I'm so horrible. And that is never something that we want to put on our kids. So what can you do instead? So state what you as the parent are feeling. And then get curious. So let me give you an example. Hey, I'm feeling really upset because you hit your sister. Can you explain to me what happened? And so it's me acknowledging, like in that moment, I am really angry. And sometimes just acknowledging that anger can make the anger stop, right? It can make the anger like kind of pause where it's at and not overflow and explode. And I think it's really helpful, again, to let the kids know what you saw and not coming in with a judgment of, you may have seen, the kids hitting each other. And maybe in that moment, if the two kids are old enough to where it could have been somebody's fault, just walking in and just saying, hey, what happened here? Even just saying that and allowing kind of natural conversation to happen. You're not coming in with, these claws up, essentially. The last phrase is big kids don't do blah, blah, blah. Fill in the blank. And big kids don't do, big kids don't hit, big kids don't whatever, is telling a child that where you are at is not okay. You should be here and you're not here. And so just like with the example of me coming into the room and shaming my daughter, even though I knew better, I regressed. And I didn't need anybody to shame me to feel shame. I didn't need anybody to guilt me to feel guilt. I could do that all on my own. And so I think in these moments, it's really important to ensure that we're not adding any extra shame or guilt to what they're already feeling, because naturally in that moment, there is going to be some guilt and shame going on. And we don't necessarily need to add in, hey, you did this thing and you should be a big kid, so you should not do that. So in these moments when you're feeling like the child developmentally should be further ahead, like let's just use hitting. This child is too old to be hitting in your mind. Not saying that they shouldn't be hitting for their age, but you believe that they should not be hitting. But they did. Step number one is getting curious about the behavior. So whether that's asking the child if they're old enough, some questions around the behavior, that could be really helpful. Or just, actually sitting down and maybe taking a moment to reflect, to understand what was going on in that moment for that child, maybe taking in the scenarios around that day. So that moment of the behavior is not the problem. It's probably the 10 things that happened prior to that. And I'll give the example of when you go to leave the park and your child starts hitting you. It's not that moment of, I'm really mad, so I'm just going to hit you. It's the fact that, they didn't feel connection earlier and they felt, not heard and they felt rushed. And so there's all these moments throughout the day, maybe you and your husband were having, a tiff in the morning, and this child is feeling all of that and it's bubbling over. And now they've just hit a kid at the park. And you're like, how could this happen? But their thermometer is starting to rise and they're starting to kind of bubble over at this point. So step one, get curious about the behavior. Step two is to acknowledge the need, to discover what that need is. And so need here, I'm not talking about, your basics, your need for food and water and sleep. Like, obviously kids are not going to perform at their best when those things are happening. And so it's kind of, acknowledging, okay, my kid didn't sleep today. Yep, that could be a reason why. But for me, the need I'm looking for is connection, love, anything that a child could feel dysregulated about. Maybe, earlier, like I said, you and your spouse were arguing. They're feeling that dysregulation. They are taking that on. And it's our job to regulate ourselves and to get ourselves to be in a place where we are calm and we are regulated, really. It is not our child's job. Our child is basically borrowing our regulation. So in these moments, what was my child needing? And really trying to figure that out. So I hope these shame phrases were helpful. I hope that the, what to do instead gave you some tips and some tools on how you can do this a little bit differently in the future. I didn't want to just give you phrases to use because I just feel like that's so scripted, and like, your child best. You know how they're going to respond. And like, just because phrase shouldn't be shaming. Maybe to your child it is. So keep that in mind as you're talking. This is going to be a lot of trial and error, and that's okay. It's okay to regress. Just as your child regresses, you are also going to regress at times, and that is okay. It's all in the repair process, which is so important when it comes to parenting. So I hope this video was helpful. If you have a shame phrase that you are consistently using and you want to get rid of it, I'm gonna ask you to comment it below. Leave it there and walk away. Let that be a space for you to just kind of dump it and say, I'm done with this. I'm not going to do this anymore. And my hope is that as parents start to do that, we kind of normalize that, like, we all do shame, and we also all do want, that's not how I want to say that. We all want to do better. We all want to be better. We want to show up for our kids differently. And so my hope is that as we kind of comb through these, we can also be aware of other phrases that we may not have realized were shame phrases. So I think it can be really powerful to, one, leave it there so you can essentially burn it, forget about it, never have to use that again. Somewhere you can just leave it. But also to go through and kind of check yourself and say, am I saying these things? And how could I handle these situations differently? So I hope you like this video. If you want to see more content like this, make sure that you hit that subscribe button so that way you get notified. You can also become a subscriber on my email list. I send out 2 emails a week, and I also share inside tips, tricks, secrets, stories, all about parenting. And I want to really I want to pour into that community of people. So I do share a lot here, but I share a lot more over on my email. You'll make sure you get everything: blog posts, podcasts, extra tips and tricks, any free guides that I put out, any of that will go there. So with all that to say, thank you guys so much for watching, and I will see you in the next video.